The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by any civilization in known space. Its curved walls stretched upward for nearly a mile, covered in the flags and symbols of 47 different species. Floating platforms carried delegates from worlds that most humans had never heard of. Strange lights danced in the air, cast by beings made of pure energy. The smell of 100 different atmospheres mixed together, filtered and balanced by ancient machines. For 10,000 years, this hall had been the center of galactic politics. Wars had been stopped here. Trade agreements had been signed. Peace had been maintained, or at least the appearance of peace. Ambassador Daniel Grant walked across the central platform, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He was a tall man in his 50s, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. Behind him, the holographic seal of the United Earth Federation glowed with soft blue light. Every eye, every sensor, every attention in the hall was fixed on him. Daniel had spent 30 years as a diplomat. He had smiled when he wanted to scream. He had shaken hands with beings whose governments had murdered human colonists. He had signed treaties that he knew would never be honored. He had done all of this because he believed that peace was worth any price. He did not believe that anymore. "Representatives of the Galactic Council," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "I come before you today with a message from the people of Earth and all human colonies." He paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. The Velith representative, a massive insect-like creature with 6 arms and compound eyes, shifted nervously on its platform. The Krath ambassador, a reptilian being covered in iridescent scales, watched with cold interest. The Aetheri delegate flickered like a candle flame, its energy form pulsing with curiosity. "Effective immediately," Daniel continued, "humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Council. All diplomatic relations are terminated. All treaties are void. All borders are closed." The silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then the hall exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted in 100 different languages. Translation systems struggled to keep up. The Velith representative was clicking its mandibles so fast that sparks flew from its jaw. The Krath ambassador had risen to its full height, nearly 8 feet of scaled muscle and barely contained rage. High Arbiter Zixthiel, the crystalline being who served as the council's leader, raised one gleaming arm. A tone rang through the hall, cutting through the noise. "Ambassador Grant," Zixthiel said, its voice like wind chimes in a storm. "This is most irregular. The Accords of Peaceful Coexistence have maintained order for 10,000 years. Surely humanity does not wish to abandon the protection they provide." Daniel laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Protection. He turned to face the High Arbiter directly. "Let me tell you about your protection. 3 years ago, the Velith Dominion invaded our colony on New Providence. 30,000 human beings were taken as slaves. When we brought this to the Council, you ruled that the Velith had historical claims to that region of space. You did nothing." The Velith representative started to speak, but Daniel cut it off with a sharp gesture. 5 years ago, the Krath hegemony bombarded our agricultural world of Haven's Rest. They claimed it was harboring terrorists. There were no terrorists. There were only farmers. 40,000 people died, including 12,000 children. When we demanded justice, you formed a committee. That committee is still deliberating." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. With a tap, he projected images into the air above the central platform. Images of burning cities, of mass graves, of human beings in chains worked to death in Velith mines, of children crying for parents who would never come home. "This is what your protection looks like," Daniel said quietly. "This is what we got for 60 years of following your rules, of being patient, of trusting that the system would work." He deactivated the display and looked around the hall one more time. "We trusted you. We believed in you. We thought that if we just kept trying, kept talking, kept hoping, things would get better." His voice hardened. "We were wrong. There is no justice here. There never was. There was only power, and we were too weak to matter." The Krath ambassador finally spoke, its voice a deep rumble. "Are you threatening us, human?" Your species is barely a footnote in galactic history. You have been among the stars for less than a century. We have ruled our domain for 50,000 years. Daniel smiled, and something in that smile made several delegates step back. I am not threatening anyone, he said. I am simply informing you that humanity no longer wishes to participate in your games. We will deal with our own problems in our own way. What happens after that is not my concern. He turned and began walking toward the exit. The delegates watched in stunned silence. No one had ever walked out of the council chamber like this. No one had ever dared. At the door, Daniel paused and looked back over his shoulder. One more thing, he said. Earth remembers its dead. All of them. Every single one. You might want to remember that. Then he was gone, and the doors closed behind him with a sound like a tomb ceiling in the chaos that followed. Few noticed the ancient Morvathi observer sitting quietly in the upper galleries. Counselor Tethril had watched the rise and fall of civilizations for over 800 years. He had seen empires crumble and species go extinct. He had learned to recognize the moments when history changed direction. This was one of those moments. They do not understand, he murmured to his young aide. They think the humans are running away. They think this is weakness. Is it not, Counselor? The aide asked. Tetril's 4 eyes blinked slowly. No, young one. The humans are not running. They are preparing. I have seen that look in their ambassador's eyes before, long ago in a species that no longer exists. They were pushed too far, just like the humans. And when they finally stopped talking and started acting, they burned half the galaxy before they were stopped. They won. Tethril rose slowly from his seat, and then they disappeared, satisfied that their enemies were destroyed. The humans will not disappear. They will remain, and they will remember. And the fools on this council have no idea what they have awakened. Far away, on a blue-green world circling an ordinary yellow star, Admiral Catherine Moore stood in a command center, buried deep beneath a mountain. Screens covered every wall, showing the positions of human ships across 100 light-years of space. He did it, said Captain Luis Ortega, her chief of staff. The ambassador delivered the message. We are officially at war with everyone. Moore nodded slowly. Not war. Not yet. Signal all commands. Operation Closed Door is now active. Seal the borders. Nothing gets in or out of human space without my personal authorization. And the aliens already in our territory? They have 24 hours to leave. After that, they are enemy combatants. She turned to face her officers, her expression carved from stone. 60 years of humiliation ends today. From this moment forward, humanity answers to no one but itself. Whatever comes next, we face it on our own terms. The lights on the strategic display began to change, hundreds of ship markers moving into new positions. The open borders that had made humanity vulnerable for so long were becoming a wall, and behind that wall, in shipyards and laboratories and training facilities across human space, something was being prepared, something that would change the galaxy forever. The talking was over. Now came the silence, and after the silence would come the storm. 3 months passed after the humans walked out of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy learned something unexpected. Silence could be more frightening than any threat. The humans had not attacked anyone. They had not made demands. They had not sent angry messages or issued warnings. They had simply closed their borders and stopped communicating. Every attempt to contact Earth was met with static. Every diplomatic vessel that approached human space was warned once to turn back, and then destroyed if it did not comply. Trade. Representative Volix of the Krath hegemony was the first to understand the economic disaster unfolding. He burst into an emergency council session, his scaled hide flushed dark purple with stress. We are ruined, he announced to the assembled delegates. Human space sits directly between our territory and the Outer Rim markets. Without transit rights, we must travel an additional 6 months to reach our trading partners. The cost is destroying our economy. Then find another route, said the Velith representative dismissively. There is no other route, Volok snapped. The humans chose their territory carefully when they first expanded. They control the only safe passage through the Void Straits. We always thought this was coincidence. Now I wonder if it was planning. Ambassador Silwan of the Aetheri Collective flickered with amusement. She was an energy being, appearing as a vaguely humanoid shape made of golden light. Her species had remained neutral throughout the conflicts with humanity, and she seemed to be enjoying the chaos. Perhaps, she said sweetly, the Krath should not have bombarded their farming colony. Actions have consequences. Representative Volix was a legitimate military operation against children, interrupted High Arbiter Zixtal. The crystalline leader rarely spoke. Kie so directly, and the chamber fell silent. I have reviewed the intelligence reports from that operation. The Krath military knew there were no astartes on Haven's Rest. They attacked because the human colony was producing grain that competed with Krath agricultural exports. 40,000 people died so that Krath farmers could charge higher prices. Volix said nothing. There was nothing to say. Meanwhile, at the edge of human space, Commander Ryan Peters sat in the control room of Border Station, Sentinel-7. The station was one of hundreds that now formed an unbroken line around human territory. Behind him, dozens of officers monitored sensor displays that showed every ship within 10 light-years. Contact approaching, reported Lieutenant Maria Santos. Velith diplomatic vessel, transponder identifies it as the voice of understanding. They are requesting permission to enter human space for negotiations. Peter studied the sensor data. The ship was large and well-armed for a diplomatic vessel. It was also broadcasting on every frequency, demanding to speak with human leadership. Have they been warned? He asked. 3 times, sir. They are ignoring our transmissions. The Velith captain claims diplomatic immunity under the old council treaties. Peters almost smiled. Almost. Those treaties no longer apply. Warn them one more time. If they cross the borderline, destroy them. The warning was sent. The Velith ship, confident that the humans would not dare fire on an official diplomatic mission, continued forward. Its captain was a veteran of 50 years of space travel. He had never met a species that would attack a vessel carrying an ambassador. He was about to learn that humans were different. The moment the ship crossed the invisible line, marking the edge of human space, Sentinel-7 fired. The weapons were new, designed and built in secret over the past 5 years. They did not use missiles or energy beams like conventional weapons. Instead, they created a focused point of artificial gravity. So intense that anything caught within it was crushed. 2 atoms in less than a second. The voice of understanding ceased to exist before its crew even knew they were under attack. Lieutenant Santos stared at her display, watching the debris field expand. Sir, there were over 200 beings on that ship, including Ambassador Threxavel. Log it as a hostile incursion, Peter said calmly. The ambassador was warned. He chose not to listen. That is not our problem. On Earth, Dr. Helen Park received the report of the incident within minutes. As Director of Strategic Communications, it was her job to manage how humanity presented itself to the galaxy. She read the details twice, then smiled. Perfect, she said to her assistant. Issue a statement? Keep it short. Say that a vessel entered human space without authorization and was neutralized according to established protocols. No apology. No explanation. No further comment. Her assistant, a young man named Kevin Morris, looked troubled. Ma'am, the council is already demanding a response. They want explanations, apologies, compensation for the families of the crew. Let them demand. Helen leaned back in her chair. Every word we say gives them information. Every explanation is a weakness they can exploit. Our strength now comes from silence. Let them wonder what we are planning. Let them imagine the worst. Their fear will do more damage than any weapon. The Galactic Council met in emergency session after emergency session. They debated and argued and threatened. They passed resolutions condemning human aggression. They demanded that Earth reopen diplomatic channels. Earth said nothing. The silence stretched on. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And slowly, the fear began to spread. Rumors started circulating through the galaxy. Traders spoke in whispers about massive construction projects hidden deep in human space. Spies reported unusual energy signatures coming from systems that had been considered worthless. A Krath scout ship that strayed too close to the border simply vanished. Leaving no trace, Counselor Tethril of the Morvathi spent his days studying every piece of information he could gather about the humans. He read their history, their literature, their philosophy. He analyzed their previous wars and conflicts. And the more he learned, the more frightened he became. "They are not like us," he told the High Arbiter during a private meeting. "We fight wars to gain advantage, to acquire resources, to increase our power. The humans fight wars to end them. When they commit to a conflict, they do not stop until the enemy is completely defeated. Not weakened. Not contained, defeated." "Surely that is an exaggeration," Zixtel said. "Look at their history. Their World War II, their enemy was one of the most powerful nations on their planet. The humans did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They burned cities. They dropped nuclear weapons. They continued until that enemy surrendered unconditionally. And then they occupied the defeated nation for decades, reshaping its entire society." The High Arbiter's crystalline form dimmed slightly. "You are saying they will do the same to us?" "I am saying they are capable of it. And we have given them reason to hate us. The Velith enslaved their people. The Krath murdered their children. We stood by and did nothing. They begged us for justice, and we offered them committees and procedures and delays." Tethril's 4 eyes were heavy with sorrow. "Now they have stopped begging. Whatever comes next, we have only ourselves to blame." Far from the Council's debates, in a star system that appeared on no official charts, Admiral Catherine Moore walked through the largest shipyard ever constructed by human hands. Around her, thousands of workers swarmed over the skeletal frames of vessels, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. These were not warships in the traditional sense. They were something new, something that would change the rules of conflict forever. Chief Engineer George Campbell fell into step beside her, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that was already filthy. "Production is ahead of schedule," he reported. "The first wave will be ready in 4 months. Full deployment in 8. Moore studied the nearest vessel, a massive structure bristling with equipment she did not fully understand. "Will they work?" "The scientists say yes. We have tested the core systems extensively. There is no reason to believe they will fail." Campbell paused. "Of course, we have never used them on actual targets. There may be surprises. There are always surprises in war." Moore turned to face him. "Make it 3 months, George. I do not think we have 8. Something is coming. I can feel it." Campbell nodded and hurried off to push his teams even harder. Moore remained, looking up at the ships that would soon carry humanity's answer to 60 years of suffering. They were not weapons of conquest. They were not tools of empire. They were something simpler and more terrible. They were instruments of justice, and justice, Moore knew, was rarely kind. The first attack came without warning. Without declaration, without any sign that it was about to happen, the Velith Dominion's primary military shipyard was called the Forge of Victory. It orbited a gas giant in the heart of Velith space, protected by defense platforms, patrol fleets, and sensor networks that could detect a ship approaching from light years away. For 300 years, it had produced the warships that made the Velith one of the most feared military powers in the galaxy. One morning, it simply vanished. Sensor stations across the sector detected a brief gravitational disturbance lasting less than a second. Then there was nothing. Where the Forge of Victory had been, there was only empty space and a slowly expanding cloud of debris. So fine, it was almost dust. No attacking fleet had been detected. No weapons fire had been observed. No warning had been given. The most heavily defended installation in Velith space had been destroyed as easily as crushing an insect. Fleet. Master Crixvan received the news while eating his morning meal. He stared at the report for a long moment, certain there had been some mistake. "This is impossible," he said. "Our sensors would have detected any approaching force. Our defenses would have engaged them. This must be a malfunction, an accident of some kind. 3 days later, the Velith's secondary shipyard was destroyed in exactly the same way. A week after that, their orbital defense command station disappeared. Panic spread through the Velith Dominion like fire through dry grass. The military, which had always been the foundation of Velith power, suddenly seemed helpless. Citizens demanded answers that their leaders could not provide. How do you fight an enemy you cannot see? How do you defend against a weapon you cannot detect? The Galactic Council met in emergency session, and for once, no one was arguing about procedure. The humans have developed some kind of new weapon, announced the Velith High Commander, a scarred veteran named Thrixton. Its nature is unknown. Its capabilities appear unlimited. We must respond before they use it against our homeworld. Respond how? Asked Silwyn of the Aetheri. You cannot even find them. Your mighty fleet sits in orbit around your worlds, watching for an attack that comes from nowhere. How do you propose to fight back? Thrixton's mandibles clicked with barely contained rage. We will invade human space. We will force them to fight us directly. Their mystery weapon may be effective for strikes against isolated targets, but they cannot use it against a fleet in combat. We will crush them with superior numbers. Counselor Tethril spoke from his seat in the observer gallery. You are making ass umptions that may not be true, Fleetmaster. You assume the humans cannot use their weapon against your ships. You assume they have only one such weapon. You assume an invasion will force them to fight on your terms. He paused, his 4 eyes blinking slowly. What if you are wrong about all of these things? Then we will adapt, Thrixton replied. But we cannot simply wait while they destroy us piece by piece. Action must be taken. The Krath hegemony, seeing an opportunity to restore their damaged prestige, offered to join the invasion force. Other species, some out of fear of the humans, and others simply hoping to share in the spoils, added their own ships. Within weeks, the largest military fleet ever assembled was gathering at the border of human space. Meanwhile, humanity continued its methodical campaign. Colonel Jake Harrison led his special operations team through the corridors of a Velith slave processing facility on a world called Crix Prime. The facility was supposed to be secret, its location known only to high-ranking Velith officials. But humanity had learned many secrets during their 60 years of quiet observation, and they had remembered every one of them. Contact ahead, whispered Sergeant Diana Cruz, checking her scanner. 12 guards, light weapons. Beyond them is the holding area. Harrison nodded and signaled his team forward. They moved like shadows, using equipment that the Velith could not detect and weapons that made no sound. Within minutes, all 12 guards were down, unconscious, but alive. The holding area door slid open, and Harrison stepped through into a nightmare. Hundreds of humans were packed into cells barely large enough to stand in. They were thin, dirty, and covered in scars from years of forced labor. Many had the empty eyes of people who had given up hope long ago. Children clung to parents who could barely stand. My God, Cruz breathed. Harrison forced himself to stay focused. Begin evacuation. Get them to the extraction point. Medical teams are standing by. As his soldiers began leading the prisoners out, an elderly woman grabbed Harrison's arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Are you real? She asked, her voice cracking. I have dreamed of rescue so many times. Please tell me this is not another dream. Harrison knelt down, so he was at her level. You are going home, ma'am. I promise. Earth has not forgotten you. The woman began to cry. Around her, other prisoners were realizing the same thing. Some collapsed, unable to believe what was happening. Others embraced the soldiers who had come to save them. A few simply stood and stared, their minds unable to process the sudden change in their circumstances. The extraction took 3 hours. When it was complete, Harrison's team planted a small device in the center of the facility. What is that? Asked one of the rescued prisoners, a young man named Peter Coleman who had been taken as a child 10 years ago. A message, Harrison replied. For the Velith, they were barely clear of the planet when the facility and everything within a mile of it vanished, erased by the same weapon that had destroyed the shipyards. In its place was a perfect sphere of nothing. a hole in the world where a building had once stood. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out wherever humans had suffered. Slave markets were destroyed. Labor camps were emptied. Facilities that had profited from human misery were erased from existence, while their prisoners were carried to safety aboard ships that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. On Earth, President Marcus Webb received daily reports of the liberation operations. Each report contained numbers: prisoners rescued, facilities destroyed, enemies eliminated. But behind the numbers were human beings whose lives had been shattered and who were now finally coming home. "How many more?" he asked Admiral Moore during one of their briefings. "We estimate there are still approximately 400 humans being held in various locations throughout Velith and Krath space. We will get them all, sir. Every single one." Webb nodded slowly. "In the invasion fleet? Assembling at the border? Current count is approximately 12,000 warships from 17 different species. They appear to be waiting for additional reinforcements before moving into our territory. Are we ready for them?" Moore's expression did not change. "We have been ready for 60 years, Mr. President. We were just waiting for the right moment." Oh no. New Providence. The colony that had been enslaved by the Velith 3 years ago. Reconstruction was finally beginning. Human ships had driven off the Velith occupiers without firing a single conventional weapon. The slave overseers had simply vanished one night, their compounds and equipment erased as if they had never existed. Now, relief workers from Earth were helping the survivors rebuild. Sandra Mitchell, a coordinator from the Humanitarian Corps, spent her days distributing supplies and her nights listening to stories that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "We thought no one was coming," said an elderly man named William Foster, sitting on what had been the foundation of his family home. "We thought Earth had abandoned us. Every day we waited, and every day the Velith worked us harder. So many people died. My wife, my son, my neighbors and friends, all gone." Sandra sat beside him, not saying anything. Sometimes there were no words that could help. Sometimes all you could do was be present. "But you came," William continued, tears streaming down his weathered face. "After everything, after all those years, you came. Why? Why now?" Sandra thought about how to answer. She thought about the political calculations, the military preparations, the strategic decisions that had been made far above her level. But that was not what William needed to hear. "'Cause you were family," she finally said. "And family does not abandon family. It just took us too long to remember that." William was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Make them pay," he said quietly. "For everyone who died, for every year we spent in chains, make them understand that there is a price for what they did." Sandra looked up at the sky, where human warships patrolled in formations that would have been impossible a year ago. "We will," she promised. "That is exactly what we are going to do." The invasion fleet began its advance into human space. Confident in their numbers and their firepower, they had no idea what was waiting for them. The invasion fleet crossed into human space on what the Velith calendar called the Day of Triumph. Fleetmaster Crixvon had chosen the date deliberately, wanting the symbolism of beginning their conquest on an auspicious day. 12,000 warships from 17 different species formed a wall of metal and firepower that stretched across light years of space. Nothing in galactic history had ever matched this force. The combined fleet carried enough weapons to sterilize 100 worlds. Its shields could withstand the output of a small star. Its crews numbered in the millions, all of them eager to teach the upstart humans their place in the galactic order. For 3 days, they advanced without opposition. No human ships rose to meet them. No defense platforms fired on their approach. The border stations that had destroyed diplomatic vessels and scout ships were silent and empty. System after system fell before the fleet without a shot being fired. "They are running," declared the Krath Admiral Voshkal during a command meeting on the 3rd day. "Just as I predicted. The humans knew they could not face us in open battle. Their mystery weapon is useless against a force of this size." Counselor Tethril, who had insisted on accompanying the fleet as an observer, said nothing. But his 4 eyes were troubled as he studied the tactical displays. Something was wrong. He could feel it, even if he could not explain it. Fleet Master Crixvan nodded in agreement with Vashkal. Continue the advance. We will reach Earth within 4 more days at this rate. Once we have their home world under our guns, they will have no choice but to surrender. The fleet pushed deeper into human space. They passed colonies that appeared abandoned, stations that showed no signs of life, shipyards that had been stripped bare. It was as if the entire human civilization had simply packed up and left. On the 4th day, they reached the Sol system. Earth hung in the void ahead of them, a blue and green jewel against the blackness of space. The human homeworld, the birthplace of the species that had dared to challenge the established order. It appeared completely undefended. Crixvan ordered his fleet to take up bombardment positions. Transmit our terms, he commanded. Unconditional surrender. Disbanding of all military forces. Return to council membership under supervision. Payment of reparations for damage caused to Velith and Krath territories. The transmission was sent. There was no response. They are stubborn, Crixvan said. Target their major cities. Perhaps the deaths of a few million will convince them to negotiate. Before the order could be carried out, the stars went dark. It happened without warning, without transition. One moment, the fleet was surrounded by the familiar star field of the Sol system. The next moment, there was nothing. Every external sensor showed absolute blackness. No stars, no planets, no other ships. Each vessel in the fleet suddenly found itself alone in an infinite void. Panic spread instantly. Crews tried to contact each other, but their communications systems showed nothing but static. Navigation systems spun uselessly, unable to find any reference point. Some ships fired their weapons blindly into the darkness, hoping to hit something, anything. The shots vanished into the void without effect. Aboard the Velith flagship, Crixvan gripped his command chair so tightly that his claws left marks in the metal. What is happening? He demanded. Where is my fleet? His officers had no answer. Their instruments told them nothing. As far as their sensors could determine, the flagship was the only object in existence. Then the voice came. It spoke in every language simultaneously, broadcast on frequencies that should not have been possible. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You were warned, the voice said. It was calm, almost gentle, but there was something beneath the gentleness that made every being who heard it feel very small. You chose not to listen. You came to our home with weapons raised, intending to murder and enslave. Now you will learn why humanity stopped talking. The void around each ship began to change. The darkness remained, but within it, images began to form. Not projections or holograms, but something that felt more real than reality itself. Each crew member found themselves experiencing visions that seemed to reach directly into their minds. They saw dead worlds. Planets that had once been covered with cities and life, now nothing but scorched rock and ash. They saw civilizations that had made the same mistake the invasion fleet had made, that had pushed humanity too far, that had refused to stop when they had the chance. They saw what happened when human patience finally ran out. The Velith saw their homeworld burning, their hives collapsing, their species reduced to scattered survivors, begging for mercy that would never come. The Krath saw their proud empire crumbling, their military shattered, their people starving in the ruins of cities they had built over thousands of years. Each species saw its own destruction, played out in terrible detail. They felt the fear of their people, the desperation of their leaders, the final moments of civilizations that had thought themselves too powerful to fall, and through it all, the voice continued. This is what we could do. This is what we chose not to do. Remember that. Remember that when you came to destroy us, we showed you mercy instead. Remember that this mercy is a choice, and choices can be changed. The visions lasted for 3 days. When they finally ended, the fleet found itself scattered across neutral space, light years from where they had entered the void. Every ship was intact. Every crew member was alive. But their weapon systems had been surgically disabled. their navigation databases erased, their communication arrays scrambled. They were helpless, drifting in space, completely dependent on rescue ships from their own governments. And every single being who had experienced the visions knew, with absolute certainty, that what they had seen was real. Not a threat, not propaganda. A simple demonstration of what humanity could do if they decided that mercy was no longer the appropriate response. Fleet. Master Crixvan sat alone in his quarters aboard the crippled flagship, staring at nothing. He had been a soldier for his entire adult life. He had fought in a dozen conflicts, led fleets to victory, watched enemies die by the thousands. He had never known fear, not truly. Now he understood what fear really meant. His aide entered nervously. "Fleet Master, we have established contact with High Command. They are sending ships to tow us home. They want to report on what happened." Crixvan laughed bitterly. "What happened?" "We lost, little one. We lost completely. Not a single shot fired, not a single casualty inflicted, and we lost. The humans could have killed us all. They could have erased our entire fleet as easily as they erased our shipyards. Instead, they let us live so we could go home and tell everyone what we experienced. Why would they do that? Because they want us to understand." Crixvan finally turned to face his aide. "They want us to know that we are only alive because they allow it. They want us to remember every day for the rest of our lives that we exist at their sufferance. That is not warfare. That is training. They are teaching us to fear them, and they are very, very good teachers." Counselor Tethril, drifting in his own disabled vessel nearby, had reached the same conclusion. He recorded a message to be transmitted to the Galactic Council, knowing that it might be the most important words he ever spoke. "The era of treating humans as a minor species is over," he said. "Whatever they were when they first joined us, they are something else now. Something that has never existed in the galaxy before. A civilization that combines our technology with a capacity for organized violence that we cannot match. They learned from us, all of us, for 60 years. They learned our weapons, our tactics, our weaknesses, and now they have surpassed us." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "We have two choices. We can continue to treat them as enemies, in which case they will destroy us. Not quickly, not carelessly, but thoroughly and completely. Or we can accept that the rules have changed and try to find a way to coexist with them. I recommend the second option, not because it is pleasant, but because it is the only option that does not end with our extinction." The message was sent. Whether anyone would listen was another matter entirely. But one thing was certain. The invasion was over, and humanity had won without firing a single shot. The aftermath of the silencing, as it came to be known, reshaped the galaxy more thoroughly than any war in recorded history. The Velith Dominion collapsed within a month. Their military, which had been the foundation of their entire society, was completely discredited. Citizens who had tolerated authoritarian rule in exchange for security suddenly realized that their government could not protect them from anything. Riots broke out in a dozen hive cities. The High Council was overthrown. The Dominion fractured into competing factions, each desperately trying to distance themselves from the policies that had brought human wrath upon them. The Krath hegemony fared little better. Admiral Vashkal, who had been so confident of victory, was tried for incompetence and executed by his own government. But that was not enough to satisfy the Krath people, who had seen visions of their civilization's destruction and blamed their leaders for bringing them to the edge of extinction. A popular revolution swept across Krath space, toppling the old regime and installing a new government whose first official act was to send a message to Earth begging for peace. Other species that had participated in the invasion faced similar upheavals. Governments fell. Alliances crumbled. The careful balance of power that had existed for 10,000 years was swept away in weeks. The Galactic Council itself ceased to function. There was no formal dissolution, no final vote. Delegates simply stopped attending sessions. Why bother with an institution that had proven so completely useless in the face of a real crisis? High Arbiter Zixtal retired to a remote monastery on a frozen moon. refusing to speak to anyone about what had happened. And through it all, humanity remained silent. For 3 months after the silencing, Earth sent no messages, made no demands, issued no statements. The borders of human space remained sealed. The galaxy waited, uncertain whether the humans were preparing another strike or simply deciding what to do next. The answer came when Ambassador Daniel Grant returned to space. He did not go to the council chamber, which now stood empty and dark. Instead, he traveled to a neutral station in unclaimed space, where representatives of the reformed governments had gathered at his invitation. The meeting room was simple, almost bare. Nothing like the grand halls where galactic diplomacy had traditionally been conducted. Grant entered alone, without guards or assistants. He looked older than he had a year ago, the weight of everything that had happened visible in the lines on his face. But his eyes were clear, and his voice was steady when he spoke. "Thank you for coming," he said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "I know this is difficult for many of you. Some of your species were our enemies not long ago. Some of you have personal reasons, too. Hate what humanity has done. I understand that." The new Velith representative, a younger official named Sirixon, who had openly opposed the old regime, leaned forward. "Ambassador Grant, we are prepared to discuss reparations. The crimes committed against humanity by the previous Dominion government were inexcusable. We want to make amends." Grant shook his head. "We are not here to talk about reparations. We do not want your money or your territory. We have enough of both. Then what do you want?" asked the Krath delegate, a civilian named Thesa Vorn who had spent years as a political prisoner under the old regime. Grant was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "We want to make sure that what happened to us never happens again. Not to us. Not to anyone." He activated a holographic display showing a new proposed framework for interstellar relations. The old council failed because it had no real power. It could issue statements and pass resolutions, but it could not enforce them. Species like the Velith and the Krath could attack weaker civilizations and face no meaningful consequences. That system is dead. It died when you invaded our space. The delegates studied the proposal with varying degrees of concern and interest. Under this framework, Grant continued, aggressive actions against any member species will result in immediate and unified response. Not committees. Not investigations. Not years of deliberation while people suffer. Action, and humanity will serve as the guarantor of that response. "You want to become the galaxy's police?" said Silwan of the Athurath, who had remained neutral throughout the crisis and attended the meeting primarily out of curiosity. "No," Grant replied firmly. "We do not want to rule anyone. We have no interest in building an empire. We just want peace. Real peace, not the fake peace that existed before where the strong could do whatever they wanted to the weak. Peace backed by the certainty that violations will not be tolerated. And if we refuse?" asked a Morvathi representative, a young successor to the retired counselor Tethril. Grant's expression did not change. "Then you are free to go your own way. We will not force anyone to join, but we will also not protect anyone who refuses. And I think recent events have demonstrated what can happen to those who stand alone against determined enemies." The meeting lasted for several more hours. There were arguments and objections and lengthy debates about specific provisions. But in the end, every representative at the table signed the agreement. They did not do so because they trusted humanity or believed in the new system. They did so because they had no other choice. On Earth, President Marcus Webb addressed the planet in a broadcast that was carried across human space and beyond. For 60 years, he said, "We tried to fit into a system that was never designed to protect us. We trusted institutions that failed us again and again. We believed that if we were patient, if we were reasonable, if we followed the rules, things would eventually get better. We learned the hard way that some powers only respect strength." He paused, his weathered face showing the weight of the decisions that had been made. "Today, we have that strength. We have weapons that no one else can match. We have shown the galaxy what we are capable of. But strength without wisdom is just another form of tyranny, and we will not become the monsters we fought against." His voice hardened. "To the galaxy, I say this. We did not want this conflict. We wanted only to live in peace, to trade, to explore, to grow alongside you. That offer remains open, but it comes with a promise and a warning. Harm any human anywhere, and you will answer for it. Not to a committee. Not to a council that will deliberate for years. To us." Admiral Catherine Moore watched the broadcast from the bridge of humanity's new flagship, a vessel so advanced that it made everything else in the galaxy look primitive by comparison. Captain Luis Ortega stood beside her, holding a datapad with the latest intelligence reports. "The Velith slave markets have all been shut down," he reported. "We have recovered every surviving human prisoner. Total count is 312, out of an estimated 2,000 taken over the past decades." Moore nodded slowly. "And the rest?" "Dead, ma'am. Worked to death in mines and factories. Killed trying to escape. Executed for various offenses." Ortega's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes showed his anger. "We have the names. We have the records. We know exactly who was responsible." Goodmore turned to look out the viewport at the stars. "Make sure that information is preserved. Humanity has a long memory, and there are still debts to be settled." In the years that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that would have seemed impossible before the silencing. The new framework that Grant had proposed became the foundation of interstellar law. Species that had preyed on the weak suddenly found themselves facing consequences for their actions. Civilizations that had been ignored or exploited discovered that they had a protector willing to answer their calls for help. It was not a perfect peace. It never would be. There were still conflicts, still injustices, still beings who tried to take advantage of others. But the worst excesses of the old order were gone, replaced by something harder and more honest. On New Providence, the colony that had sparked humanity's withdrawal from the Council, a monument was built to honor those who had died under Velith occupation. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone covered with names. Standing in a field where a slave compound had once been, Sandra Mitchell, who had stayed on as a permanent relief coordinator, attended the dedication ceremony. She stood in the crowd as President Webb spoke about sacrifice and memory and the price of freedom. But her attention was on the people around her, survivors who had endured years of slavery. Children who had been born in captivity and were now learning what it meant to be free. Families who had been reunited after thinking they would never see each other again. This was why humanity had fought. Not for territory or power or revenge. For these people, for the right to live without fear, for the simple truth that some things were worth protecting, no matter the cost. After the ceremony, an old man approached her. It was William Foster, the survivor she had spoken to on her first day on New Providence. He looked healthier now, stronger, though the scars on his arms and the sorrow in his eyes would never completely fade. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for everything, for not giving up on us." Sandra shook her head. "I did not do anything. I just handed out supplies and listened to stories." "You listened," William said firmly. "When no one else in the galaxy cared, you listened. That mattered. It still matters." He looked up at the sky, where human ships patrolled in formations that promised protection to everyone below. "My wife and son are gone," he continued quietly. "Nothing can bring them back. But because of what your people did, no one else will have to go through what we went through. That is worth something. That is worth everything." Sandra followed his gaze upward, watching the ships move among the stars. She thought about the price that had been paid to reach this moment, the years of patience that had finally run out, the terrible weapons that had been built in secret, the visions of destruction that had broken the will of a galactic invasion force. Humanity had become something dangerous, something feared, but they had also become something else, something that the weak and the vulnerable could count on, something that would stand against injustice when no one else would. Was it the right path? Sandra did not know. Perhaps no one would ever know for certain. But looking at the survivors around her, at the children playing in fields that had once been labor camps, at the hope in eyes that had known only despair, she thought it might be close enough. The galaxy had wanted humanity to be quiet and obedient. It had wanted them to accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy. It had wanted them to suffer in silence, while more powerful species did as they pleased. Instead, humanity had become something that could not be ignored, something that would not be controlled, something that remembered every wrong and had the power to make things right. The talking was over. The silence had served its purpose. And now, for the first time in 60 years, humanity was ready to speak again. But this time, the galaxy was listening.